Welcome to the Innovator. It's the President's Forum podcast where we talk accountable innovation in higher education. I'm your host, Wesley Smith, and today I'm talking with David Andrews, who serves as the Chancellor at the University of Massachusetts Global. David has decades of experience, and we've worked with him for a long time here at the President's Forum. We're going to get to know him better today, so let's get to know him. All right, David, thank you for joining this podcast. The first portion of the podcast, it's dedicated to getting to know the presidents that we have on. So I know a little about you, and I know something that maybe not all of our listeners know. So I'm going to start out the podcast with the toughest question of the day. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Djokovic, Federer, or Nadal?
Federer.
Really? Federer. Tell us why.
Classic game. One-handed backhand. Old school.
The one-handed backhand is old school. So tell us a little bit about your tennis background.
So actually I used to be a teaching pro, focusing more on the mental side of the game. I also worked as an assistant coach for the women's team at Ohio State University for several years, while I was the dean of the School of Education. So long history in tennis, still play on a regular basis. So not the toughest question.
Yeah. Well, some would say it's pretty tough, but others may disagree with your answer, by the way. I
know, but I've moved into a stage of life where I just have to be cagey and tricky. I'm not going to win with power anymore.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay. Tell us a little bit about how you came to your current position as the Chancellor at University of Massachusetts Global.
I spent most of my career on the very traditional side of higher education and have had it in my entire career. I tell people I liked higher education so much, I liked education so much that I just stayed. I never left college. But the first part of my career was in very traditional institutions. Oregon State for 6 years, University of Oregon for 6 years, 15 years at Ohio State University, then 6 years at Johns Hopkins, and then came into this more open access working adult space as president of National University before joining UMass Global about a year and a half ago.
So give me an example of, you've been in a lot of different institutions, but give us an example of student-first thinking, and how has it influenced the University of Massachusetts Global?
That's a great question. I think it's in the very initial conceptualization of what you're going to offer at an institution. You have to think about, the students you're targeting, do they have access? And access is much more than affordability and offering courses. Can they take advantage of what you're offering in the way you're offering it? So it's led us to much more asynchronous programming, on-demand types of support, being able to respond to students late at night, early in the morning, really challenging the idea that everybody has to start and stop at the same time, and that everyone is available to take advantage of the support that you're offering in the same way and at the same time. So everything from the design of the delivery model has to start with, are you thinking about students first, or are you thinking about the faculty schedule first? Or are you thinking about how you're going to monetize it with financial aid? At packaging and how easy that is to do in a traditional format. But our working adult students are doing their work at 2 o'clock in the morning. And if you don't give them that option, you're not being student-centric in the way you're approaching them.
Right. I mean, this so happens to be very, very helpful the less traditional the student is, right? I mean, if you've got 18-year-olds that can be on campus and don't have schedules that they have to accommodate, it's much easier to have a traditional education. But if they're working odd hours or multiple jobs and they're trying to cram in an education, I think the learner first issue becomes, prominent.
It's critical. Otherwise, they can't take advantage of what you're offering. And everything from the way you schedule your courses to the content delivery to the credential itself. I mean, another example of student first thinking is, are you actually offering the kind of credential that are going to be most valuable to the student at the time they're seeking it? Right. And sometimes that's degrees that are easy to package for federal financial aid that we're all addicted to. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's short form courses with credentials that look very different in the micro credential world, especially when you're talking about workforce relevant. our students are all thinking about work and the workforce relevance of what we're offering. And if they can't fit that into what their expectations are, their goals are, they're just not going to participate.
So I love your point on delivery, right? Delivery has to be accessible, and we have to figure out ways to get around time constraints, cost constraints, and things that help our students. But the other thing that you're mentioning now is, workforce relevance, and that kind of transitions us to the next question that I want to ask you. It's about policy. It's about how do we drive, like shorter term credentials, or how do we? So the question that I want you to answer for us though is, what is it that the President's Forum institutions in concert need to work on to drive policy to better accommodate learners?
That's a great question, and it's about the credential currency itself. I mean, we know one currency, Carnegie units stacked into courses, which put together in some combination lead to degrees or certificates. And our first thought, as most institutions, is how do we package that into a course? And a course meaning something that's eligible for Carnegie unit type credit. And the reason is because exactly why Carnegie units were put together in the first place was to be able to standardize things. And they do. They do a great job of standardizing for transfer credit, for everyone understanding what a 3 credit hour English course stands for. But it's not meeting the needs of the workforce. So we have to, part of the policy agenda has to be to expand the credential currency with a taxonomy that people understand and that it's accessible because it's easier for us to package in terms of financial aid access. Whether it's Pell eligibility for short form courses, whether it's thinking about, and it has so many implications when you think about that credential currency and how we support our students, even to the point of focusing on substantive engagement with faculty. Sometimes that's necessary in the chunks
Right.
that we put into courses, and sometimes it's necessary, in a six hour reply to a text, which has nothing to do with the course itself and the delivery of face-to-face, online, virtual content in a model that meets the criteria for substantive engagement. So, we've got a lot of work to do to rethink the currency and make PACE the final frontier. Really, we're standardizing to PACE, and so it's becoming a cliche that we are. Time is the constant and learning is the variable, and we have to flip that equation. Right? And there are so many policies wrapped up in getting that done. It's going to be a challenge.
So that's a crazy observation that maybe I think a lot of people in innovation and higher education have thought through that. But for those who are kind of new to the innovation and higher education concept, can you explain that just a little bit about learning is pace is the variable versus learning being the variable? How has that influenced where education has gone and
I
where
think
we're
it's had
going?
a dramatic influence, because what we think about is how much time people spent trying to learn something rather than how much they learned. And we're pushing towards a more competency-based approach where you're actually measuring skills and knowledge, and you don't care how long it took them to get it. But our course format is organized where everybody starts and stops at the same time over a fixed period of time. And I blame Carnegie units for this because there is a standard formula for how much time you need to spend trying to learn something relative to how much time, instead of how much you actually learned and can demonstrate. And so those of us that have moved to more of a competency-based approach, which we have, are tackling that. But I'll make you one other observation. That's still only 6% of our overall volume of learners are taking competency-based.
Yeah.
Another
So
94% understands what it means to enroll in a course and it doesn't matter whether it's 4-week course, 6-week, 8-week course. The units that get accumulated are Carnegie units, and people understand what that means.
It'll take a lot of understanding, a lot of socialization of competency-based versus Carnegie, time-based units to help people understand this. I was in a meeting with some legislators at one point talking about competency-based education, and everybody thinks of a bachelor's degree as a 4-year degree. and they were asking some students who had been engaged in competency-based education how long it took them. And I think one of the students mentioned it was like 13 months to get essentially a bachelor's degree, right? And the same units that would qualify you for a bachelor's degree or a 4-year degree in many people's minds. And the legislators listening, they were just blown away. And some of them had to they were thinking, is that right? Is it okay if somebody learns faster? Yeah. Or is it cheating the system, or is it a bad education if learners, have different paces? It's kind of an interesting concept to get used to.
It's very interesting, and it's challenging for a number of people to get their head around. And it's the same in the fourth grade. Why are you in the fourth grade? Because you're the age of a fourth grader, and you
Right.
stay there the whole year. Doesn't matter what you know. Doesn't matter if you know everything that you're taught in the fourth grade. You still have to go through it because we have a time-based kind of system. And the alternative, is if someone showed up at your door as an institution and knew everything that you needed them to know to get the degree, and you could validate that with just pure assessments, would you give them the degree without ever stepping foot in a classroom or in a learning environment on your campus? And if the answer is no, then why not? Why not? Because they've got to do their time. You've got to do your time.
Yep.
And we're so time focused that it's a real challenge for that. There are some institutions, 2-3 institutions around the world that have decided if you show up knowing everything you need to know, we'll give it to you. But it's extraordinarily rare, even in the most innovative settings within the United States.
Right.
Because we have to make some money somewhere. The bottom line is, as much as you hate to say it, you got to make some money somewhere. So if you had an institution that only charges for the assessments and has an a la carte on how much support you need as a student, that is, how much you need help with the learning versus demonstrating what you know for the credential, then we'd be in pretty good shape. But the reality is you can't get any type of external funding to offer those types of programs. You have to do it on your own dime, and you have to then charge for the assessments relative to a price point that's not sustainable for most of us.
Right. I mean, this is we could do an entire podcast on just, time-based learning versus, competency-based learning. It's fascinating stuff.
Right.
I want to move us to the lightning round of questions. We're going to get to know you and how you think. Are you ready for 10 quick questions?
10 quick questions.
10 quick questions. Okay. What's the most important habit that learners should develop?
I'm biased here. I say write something every day. Write something every day, or document something every day. Doesn't have to be writing it, so that you're starting to get the habit of transmitting information to others.
Right. All right. If you weren't limited by resources, what education passion project would you pursue?
I would build early childhood centers around the world and make them free. Not exclusively in the United States. I mean, I think early childhood is the foundation for everything else you're able to achieve, and how you can run the gauntlet in this sorting engine that's education. We should start everybody on equal ground with really basic, well-designed early childhood education.
You really took that very seriously. The limit, if you weren't limited by resources, because that would be an enormous undertaking especially if you were to do it globally.
Yes, but with economists behind the return on that investment being one of the most solid things you could do.
Right.
If you were able to invest that up front with the confidence that it would move the needle, even in determining as Heckman told us years ago, 2 decades ago now, best investment we can make in terms of building a stronger economy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What profession other than yours would you like to attempt?
What profession? I would say 2 things. One is a neonatologist. I really got into development and developmental psychology, child development, because of real fascination and interest with babies. My daughters that are well into their adult years tell me I just can't go to people and take their baby and try to hold it. So it's weird at this point. So probably a neonatologist or a wedding singer. That's the other choice. I fancy myself as a pretty good wedding singer.
This may come. This may come in handy for a President's Forum reception down the road. That would be. I think that would bring people to the reception.
I just don't know if you can afford me.
All right. Well, I thought you were going to say tennis. I mean, something to
Yeah.
do with tennis as a career other than yours, but we'll let those two slide. All right. What's the best book you've read in the last year?
Grasp by Sarma, and Who Gets In and Why by Jeff Salingo. If you're in higher education, you haven't read Who Gets In and Why, and you want to know how reputation is driven by selectivity, fascinating book. He spent a year in admissions offices around the country, both highly selective and more open access, and it's really confirmed and even reshaped the way I think about the role of selectivity and the reputation of an institution and the
Yeah.
need for more open access opportunities.
Great recommendation on that one. Outside of work, how do you spend your free time?
Well, obviously we've talked about playing tennis, but I also have we have horses. So I'm an animal lover. I have one dog, two horses, three chickens, and four grandchildren. So it keeps me busy.
What what piece of advice would you give your younger self?
I would say take risk, continue to take risk. Don't be afraid of risk taking, and be as aggressive as you can in taking those risks.
Yeah.
And it comes natural to young people anyway. So we kind of squash their creativity and their risk taking in trying to protect them. But no one needs to protect you from yourself in terms of risk taking.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Tell me about the best day that you've had at work.
Every year at commencement is my best day of the year. If you really forget why you're doing what you're doing, especially for me in higher education, I get to commencement early. It's like game day. Commencement is our game day. I get there early and I visit with the students and their families before the ceremony begins, before we wear them down with long speeches. And the enthusiasm and the excitement always re-energizes me. And we do everything remote now, both remote work and remote learning, but we still
Right.
have face-to-face commencement. And I think that will be the hardest thing for me to give up. Should there be a day where we don't do face-to-face commencement because we have such a large geographic scope, we'll find a way to get together because you need to celebrate those accomplishments, and they're great.
Huge day, and it's so fun, especially for access institutions, where you see not only parents cheering on their children who are graduating, but children cheering on their parents who are graduating.
Yeah, I think one of the angriest the students ever been at me was a couple years back when he only got 20 tickets for commencement. He said he wanted 40 tickets. I said, I'll give you 40 tickets, but I want to meet these 40 people. And so I met them for commencement. He had aunts, he had uncle, we counted them. We lined them up, took a picture, and he had 40 people. He used every single ticket. And it had taken him 8 years to get his undergraduate degree. It was one of the proudest moments for him, and one of the most emotional moments for me as a leader in higher education.
That's all. That's a great story. That's a great story. All right. What is one innovation outside of education that has most improved your life?
Well, it's not Zoom, but I think cell phones. I think cell phones have to be. I mean, we've almost forgotten the day when we didn't have cell phones. In fact, my grandchildren ask, "Why do people say hang up the phone?" No concept of anything other than that digital access. Hang up
Yeah.
the phone. They've probably seen it now on celebrations in
Yeah.
athletic. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah. Why do we? It's a holdover from years past. Yeah. That's excellent. Okay. If you could take this, we're going to end with this one. If you could take one class from any expert, living or dead, what would the class be, and who would the instructor be?
It would be Jean Piaget, cognitive development of children. And that seems boring to most, and most of us took it as a mandatory part of our psychology or social science. But I joined this, I stayed in higher education because of the concepts there and not the stages that children go through. The notion that this is how we change and evolve. This is how we iterate and get better, assimilation and accommodation and equilibration. And it changes everything about the way I think about moving individuals and institutions forward. And he started his, everyone probably reads in their textbook, he started off as a biologist studying mollusks. How does somebody get from there to
Right.
this theory of change and the evolution of individuals as they grow and develop? I think it'd be fascinating. But maybe in the end it would be as boring as probably the audience thinks it sounds.
Hey, I mean, your passion for child development really comes through, and I think that that's one of the great things about these podcasts and these interviews is you get to know some of the personal things, some of the things that make presidents tick. So, thanks. Thank you, Chancellor. We're grateful for your time and the work you're doing at the University of Massachusetts Global, and thanks for joining us.
I appreciate it. Wonderful experience. Thank you.
All right, my thanks to Chancellor David Andrews for joining us today, and please join us in our next episode. We'll discuss innovation that's measured by student success. After all, the only thing that really matters is the success of our students.